Hello everyone. Okay, this is Understanding Macroeconomics Lesson 2. This is when we start the measuring of economic performance. So in the next few lessons we're going to measure 6 of these: the unemployment rate, the inflation rate, gross domestic product or GDP, international trade balances, and there are several of those, the government budget deficit, which is fun to do but really depressing, and inequality measure, which is the most common one, is the Lorenz curve. So in this lesson we're doing the unemployment rate, and then the others will follow. Okay, so let's begin. The unemployment rate is simply the ratio, that is, the number unemployed divided by the labor force. The only thing complicated about calculating the unemployment rate is this term down here, the labor force. The labor force is defined to be the number who are employed, that part's obvious, but also the number unemployed. So this is a big stumbling block for students who aren't very careful. Remember now, the labor force is the number employed plus the number unemployed. So you could, by substitution, rework this definition up here, this formula, and write it like this: the unemployment rate is equal to the number unemployed divided by the number employed plus the number unemployed. Sounds a little odd to read it that way, but just remember that this thing right here, the number employed and the number unemployed, is the labor force. Okay, so let's try a simple problem. Suppose that I told you that the number employed was 12,000 and that the number unemployed was 500. And then I ask you, okay, find the labor force. Well, the labor force would just be the sum of these two, 12,000 plus 500. So the labor force would be 12,500. Now, what would be the unemployment rate? So a student who is not careful might calculate that the unemployment rate is 500 divided by 12,000, but that's not it. The unemployment rate would be the number unemployed, which is 500, divided by the labor force, which is 12,500, and that works out to be 4%. The unemployment rate in this simple problem is 4%. Okay, now let's try what I've titled a slightly harder problem, but actually this problem is considerably harder. Suppose instead I gave you the unemployment rate was 5%, and I told you that the number of people employed was 40,000, and now I'm going to ask you to figure out how many were unemployed. So the way you would do that is you would just take the givens here and apply them to the definition. That is 5%, 0.05, equals the number unemployed, which we don't know, divided by the number unemployed plus 40,000. That's the labor force. Now in the next step, I'm going to take this denominator here. I'm going to multiply both sides by that denominator, and that will pull it over to the left side. So now I have 0.05 times the number unemployed plus 40,000 equals the number unemployed, which is, see, that's all that's left now on the right hand side is this term up here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute this 0.05 inside these parentheses. So when I do that, I'm going to get 0.05 times the number unemployed plus 2,000. This number 2,000 is simply the 40,000 times the 0.05. Okay? Now, the next step is I'm just going to take this term right here and push it over to the right-hand side where there's a similar term. So I'm going to subtract this from both sides. When I do that, I still have the 2,000 on the left side, but now it's equal to the number unemployed minus 0.05 times the number unemployed. Now these two terms I can combine together. This is 1, right? This is 1 number unemployed minus 0.05 number employed gives me 0.95 times the number unemployed equals 2,000. And finally I'm going to divide by both sides by 0.95, and I get that the number unemployed is 2,105.3 workers. So it took quite a few steps. It's not difficult, but it is tedious, and I would recommend that when I give you one of these to do, that you work it out just like I have, step by step, being very careful not to drop some term or make some careless mistake. Careless mistakes count just as badly as real ones. Okay, so I could also ask you to tell me what the labor force is in this problem, but that actually is really simple now that we've done all this work. The labor force is simply the number employed, which was 40,000, plus the number unemployed, which we calculated, and that works out to be 42,105.3 workers is the labor force. Alright, so that's the two kinds of problems that you might get using the formula for the unemployment rate. But there is something else to consider about how we measure unemployment, and that is, what are the definitions, or maybe a better way to put it is, how do we determine who is employed and who is unemployed? Who decides this? In the Blackboard world, where I live most of the time, the question is kind of moot. People are just employed or they're unemployed. But in the real world, it's really quite complicated. So I've set up just a few little examples to show you the nuances in trying to figure out who is employed and who is not. Alright, so this kind of data is compiled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they have a great website, bls.gov, and you can search through their data on all kinds of unemployment stuff, and they'll download it into an Excel format for you. It's really quite excellent. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses a random sample to help them figure out who is employed and who is not. And this random sample has only two questions, two very simple questions. The first question is, are you working? Yes or no? So if you answer yes, then you are put in the employed box. And if you answer no, you go down to question number 2. And question number 2 says, have you searched for work in some time period? Now, frankly, I can't remember if it's have you searched for work in the last 2 weeks, or have you searched for work in the last 10 days, or have you searched for work in the last 15 days? I don't remember, but it's a pretty short time period. Have you searched for work, yes or no? Okay, so if you answer yes, that you have searched for work, then you're counted as unemployed. But if you answer no, then you're not counted. So the takeaway from this slide is, if you don't search for work, you're not counted. You're not unemployed, you're not employed, you just don't count. Now that sounds okay at first, but I've set up a few examples to show you how this is a little bit problematic. Alright, so first let's just lay the formulas out here so you can remember them. And now, what about discouraged workers? Now, what exactly is a discouraged worker? Imagine that you got laid off, that you had a good job and you got laid off. You got your little notice on a Friday afternoon, and so Saturday you're all depressed. Oh, woe is me, I got laid off, what am I going to do? But Sunday afternoon you kind of like get up, you get motivated to put this behind you. So you work on your resume, and at 8 o'clock Monday morning you drive over to Kinko's and you get your new resume all polished, printed up, you put on your best power suit, and you go out and you pass out your resume to all the potential employers in the region. And of course you're looking at your phone every 20 minutes to see who's going to call, and let's say that no one calls. No one calls the first day, the second day, the third day, the second week, the third week, the fourth week. Eventually you become discouraged, and you search less and less until finally, now I'm telling this kind of crazy story, and some of you probably lived through this and you don't appreciate the story, but I can't help it. So finally you're so discouraged that on weekdays it's like 11 o'clock in the morning and you're still in your pajamas, you're laying on the couch eating cookies out of a bag and watching daytime television. Now that's truly a discouraged worker. Now consider that worker. Alright, they get the survey. Are you working? And they answer, well, no, I'm not working. They go down to question number 2. Have you searched for work? And no, this poor worker is so discouraged that they've given up searching. What's the point? So no, they have not searched. And so what about those discouraged workers? They are not counted. So it's been a few years now, but we had a really bad recession in 2008, 2009, and the unemployment rate was above, I think, 10%. And a lot of workers got so discouraged that they just kind of dropped out. And when they did, when they dropped out, they stopped looking. It made the unemployment rate look better because these people who were once counted as unemployed now weren't counted anywhere. All right, I spent enough time on that one. What about part-time workers? There are plenty of people who like part-time work and they're very happy doing it, but there are others who really want full-time work with benefits and so forth, but they can't find that, and so they piece together things working part-time. Maybe they're working 2 or 3 part-time jobs. You and I would probably agree that those workers have a problem and they really need full-time work. But what happens in this little algorithm that the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses? Okay, well look, are you working? Hey, if you're working even 1 hour a week, then the answer is yes. So part-time workers answer yes, so they are employed. What about part-time workers? They're counted as employed, even though you and I might think that their work conditions are really not good and they need to find better work. But by the way this algorithm works, they're counted as employed, just like every other full-time worker. All right, what about unhappy workers who are searching for better jobs? There are plenty of people who are in really terrible jobs, dead-end jobs, with no future, and they're looking for something better, and they search and they can't find it. What about those workers? Well, are you looking for work? Are you working? And the answer is yes, they are working. So those workers, those unhappy workers, are counted as employed. What about underemployed workers? Now this is a new term. You might not be familiar with it, underemployed. Underemployed person is someone who has a very valuable skill set, but they can't find work in that chosen profession, and they're doing something else. It sounds a little odd, but actually there are a lot of highly technical jobs that are kind of tied to government contracts. And when those government contracts run out, those people become unemployed. It's especially true, it sounds almost like I'm making this up, but I'm not. It's especially true for people who are in aerospace and all kinds of defense things, especially aerospace stuff. So the government funds some big project, they all move to maybe Seattle, Washington, and they're working, but then the project expires after a few years and they get laid off. And while they're laid off, you might imagine that maybe they have children, the children are in high school or something, they don't want to move away and they can't find work, so they work as best they can, like maybe working some management job at the Quickie Mart or something. Sounds terrible and I'm making that up. But what about those workers? You and I would agree that they are not really employed in their chosen profession, but they would be counted as employed because in the survey, when it asks, are you working, yes or no, they would answer yes. All right? Now what about gray market employees? So gray market are people who are working kind of under the radar of the government. They're not paying workman's comp, they're not paying taxes, they're certainly not contributing to Social Security. Maybe they don't have a business license, so they're just kind of on the down low. But they don't have to be people doing, they don't have to be selling drugs or something. They could be painting houses, repairing cars, doing yard work, babysitting, walking dogs. They could be doing all kinds of things. It's just that they're doing it under the radar of the government. So what about those kinds of people? All right. Well, the first question says, are you working? Now, what I didn't tell you is the question is really phrased a little bit different. The question is phrased, are you legally working? And of course they are not. They don't have a legal job. They're kind of under the radar. So they wouldn't say on the form, hey, I got a job but it's an illegal job. They would just say, no, I'm not working. And that would get them down to the second question, have you searched for legal work? Okay, and they could answer either way. They might say, no, I haven't. I'm perfectly happy painting houses, or I'm perfectly happy, doing whatever it is they're doing. And so I'm not looking for legal work. So in that case, they wouldn't be counted. On the other hand, maybe they're, repairing cars or something, but they would really like to get a legal job, maybe with benefits and so forth. And so then they might answer, yes, I am looking for legal work, but I haven't found any, in which case they would be counted as unemployed. So, what about these gray market employees? Depending on how they answer, they might be counted as unemployed if they're actually looking for legal work, or they might be not counted at all. Finally, there's the issue about workman's comp. Now, workman's compensation is a government program designed to make life a little better when you get laid off. I mean, think about it. You get laid off, you have plenty of expenses, maybe you have children. It's really terrible. And so we have in place this little program, kind of like insurance. Every firm pays into it. That is, those legal firms, they pay into it. And so if you get laid off, you can draw unemployment compensation. But it has a side effect, especially in how we measure unemployment. If you're receiving workman's comp, you have the ability to be a little more selective about the kind of work you take. So imagine that you're drawing workman's compensation, you've been laid off, and you find a job, a pretty good job, but it's in Charlotte, or it's in Dallas, or it's in Memphis, or it's someplace kind of far away, and you have school-aged children and you don't want to, pull them up out of the schools and move them. You might decide to not take that job. So you would be counted as unemployed because you haven't found the job that you want. But if there was no workman's comp, I'm thinking about how terrible that would be, but if there wasn't workman's comp and you found a job opening, say, in Dallas or someplace, then you would take it because you really need it. So workman's comp, it's a little bit odd, but workman's comp makes the unemployment rate a little higher than it would have been otherwise. So people who are on workman's comp, they're counted as unemployed, and they have some discretion to search a little longer for a job closer to where they want to be. Okay, so this is just some of the scenarios that can go on, and I'm sure you've thought of others. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics defines employed and unemployed people based on that simple survey. Alright, so let's summarize what we've done in this lesson. The unemployment rate is a ratio between the number who are unemployed and the labor force. The definition of who is employed and who is unemployed is arbitrary and a bit controversial. Each of us could think of different definitions, but no matter what definition you thought of, there would still be some wiggle room, some arbitrariness of no matter what we did. So I don't want to leave you with the idea that the people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics are really stupid and they made up stupid rules. No, it's true they made up arbitrary rules, but if you just let me do it, I would make up maybe slightly different arbitrary rules, but there would still be some, error. Hey, it's an imperfect world. Nobody could think of a perfect definition. The data on the unemployment rate is available from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and here's their website again. And you might be interested to know that they publish rates for each state in each month. In fact, most of the metropolitan areas are also published. The data is monthly, and they also separate it out by men and women, by ethnic groups, age groups, and by education. It's not surprising, but maybe you don't know that the highest unemployment rate is very young, like teenagers or young adults who have no job skills, and probably in some ethnic minority group, their unemployment rate is quite high. So at the time I'm making this video, the unemployment rate's about 6%, but for those unskilled, untrained, very young workers, the unemployment rate, I think, is over 25%. You can look it up at bls.gov. All right, that's it. Hope you found this helpful.